In ancient times and places where potable water was scarce and people drank alcoholic beverages for substance. How were the people not dehydrated and hung over all the time? That is almost entirely a modern-day myth. There were systems in place to ensure the town's water supply wasn't contaminated and drinking water in most of the world was perfectly fine. They even had a system where tanners and blacksmiths and such would be fined if their cast-offs made it into the water supply, and they were only allowed to operate in certain areas of town to keep the water supply clean. The laborers did drink a lot of ale and beer while working, but it was because the alcohol content was so low that it kept them hydrated and helped give them calories to keep up their energy. It was more like medieval Gatorade than actual alcohol as we think of it. What about on ships? Do you know how they had clean water out at sea? Their alcoholic drinks were way less strong than today's. A plain beer in history might only be 2 to 3% alcohol. With modern-day beers 4 to 5% is standard on the low end. Some get up to 8%. So, the dehydrating effects of their drinks really weren't as serious. Also, in most cases, people still drank water. It was only really rare situations where the water wasn't trusted in cities/urban areas. But even then, take ancient Rome. They built massive infrastructure, aqueducts, to bring water into their cities and into their fountains. Fountains that people did drink out of. The idea that people never drank water is a fallacy. There are many beers above 8%. I based my point on the most common brands I see. And maybe that's skewed for me cause I'm a poor American student who only gets cheaper light beer. Also to those Belgians who told me that that's kiddo beer, I'd love to try whatever y'all got going on. When you think of the kind of beer that people would drink all day, it's nowhere near the alcohol volume that you'd expect from beer today. Small beer back then was more like 1% ABV. Many cultures that drank wine would dilute the wine with water to make it less harsh. So there were a lot of ways to minimize the amount of alcohol taken in while still using it to make water potable. One of the most epic roasts in history involves a Roman politician insulting another because he didn't dilute his wine like a person of culture and instead got faced like a filthy plebeian. I don't have the exact source at hand. But for those of you curious enough to ask, search for Cicero's works on invective. Dude elevated public insults to a form of art and wrote extensively on the subject. Shortly after Caesar's murder, after Mark Antony accused Cicero of being the brains in the conspiracy against Caesar. The whole thing is a diss track against Mark Antony. But paragraph 26 is the epic description of Antonius' drunkenness. Unfortunately, Cicero never actually delivered the speech to the Senate, but instead distributed copies among his friends. IIRC. The ancient Greeks used to top up their enormous wine jugs with water as the wine was drunk. So the wine became more and more diluted as the evening went on, probably helping to prevent hangovers in the process. You can sustain your water hydration with a 5% beer easily if that is all you drink. Your liver won't like it. Your kidneys won't like it. Probably your stomach and digestive system, but you can sustain off beer for at least 10 years so far. Because they weren't drinking hard liquor 24/7. Beer and other alcohol was heavily diluted. Even wine. What we consider wine these days would have been considered more like wine concentrate at some points. Meant to be diluted with water before drinking. I mean, even my grandpa was drinking wine with added water when working in the fields. Quite common in France in the rural areas. An important thing to point out is that it was never the alcohol that made the water safe to drink. To kill bacteria you need about 60 to 70% alcohol. The thing that made the water safe was boiling, which is a step in the beer brewing process. Tea or anything made after boiling water would have been safe too. It's nearly impossible for human pathogens to survive in even moderately alcoholic liquids. Wine, which would not be boiled, was likely 5 to 10% alcohol and inhospitable to harmful bacteria. Further, Man selectively domesticated vinifera grapes to produce more sugar over millennia, thus increasing alcoholic content and Bronze Age fun. Sterilizing and making a foodstuff safe for consumption are two very different things. And unfortunately, a lot of ancient cultures drank from lead cups. It's not a myth like the other commenter posted. I actually did a research paper on this. The answer is the alcohol content tended to be lower. Yes. Typically, running water and various water sources existed that weren't as dangerous as we think. But that wasn't true everywhere. People did drink beer/mead more frequently, which was ultimately safer because the water is boiled as part of the process. It wasn't instead of water, which I think is what the commenter means. But it was certainly safer. They also found traces of tetracycline in vats from ancient Egypt. There is evidence to suggest it would have been antibacterial as well. The source you showed just uses negative evidence and didn't really show anything that suggests that people drank alcohol instead of water, but rather that they just drank alcohol and found it more worthy of writing about. I always wondered this. Wouldn't people just feel like S every day of their lives? They weren't chugging high-proof Everclear, rum and vodka. And most people quickly develop a tolerance if they drink regularly. So light beer or small beer would have little effect. Well, A, most water was fine, and B, most beverages had very low alcohol content. Think lemon, lime and bitters. I flip and love a lemon, lime and bitters. Drinking one of those at the pub with your parents, thinking you were all grown up. Just to add, beer generally has low enough alcohol content to not cause dehydration. Hard liquor, though, will dehydrate you. While a lot of what people have pointed out, lower ABV ECT, are true, a lot of the aristocracy, including the founding fathers, drank enough to make a frat boy question if it was a good idea. Workers were given a small amount of alcohol in colonial times, and they would supplement that with stills. However, a lot of the landed gentry would have a solid buzz going at all times. I'm a bit confused by your idea that in ancient times good water was scarce. Whatever gave you that idea? They had rivers, wells, cisterns, dams, lakes, ponds, reservoirs and springs. Ancient people weren't morons. They settled near water. The small beer had a low alcohol content, around 1%, so it was more a liquid food than it was an alcoholic drink. In colonial America, they drank lots and lots and lots of beer. But beer could mean many things. They had their stronger stuff for boozing it up, of course. But the daily drink was small beer. Small beer was made with the remnants of a previous beer-making batch of stuff. The grain and yeast was reused to make a much weaker, more watery beer that was drunk at meals, given to children, etc. It wasn't exactly like they were drinking full on alcohol all the time. In 1787, 2 days before they signed off on the Constitution, the 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention partied at a tavern. According to the bill preserved from the evening, they drank 54 bottles of Madeira, 60 bottles of claret, 8 of whiskey, 22 of porter, 8 of hard cider, 12 of beer and 7 bowls of alcoholic punch. Maybe not all the time, but they could certainly put any college frat to shame when they went hard. The word you meant was sustenance, BTW, which is food or drink regarded as a source of strength or nourishment. Substance would be the physical material that something is made of. I saw this one show. I believe it was South or maybe Central Americans. And they would chew up these roots and spit the chewed up root into clay pots. Saliva contains enzymes that break down the root starches into sugar. About a week later, they all gather and basically have a feast/party with this root beer. Amazingly, it's not boiled or anything. They put a cloth over the clay pots to reduce contamination. That's it. Apparently it doesn't taste that great, but it can get around 6 to 8% before the yeast dies. So pretty decent drink if you want to get buzzed. This still occurs today. The host of the show got a hangover. But the Aboriginals, IIRC, seemed to really enjoy it. It was a special occasion deal. They didn't drink this booze daily. People purified water using sand and distillation. This should remove contaminants. When I was in Cuba, they told me how they cleaned the water. They have a bowl made of clay with tiny holes inside. The water gets purified by pouring through the bowl.